Harry Potter, The Prisoner of Azkaban, Book 3. Outpost. Harry was a highly unusual boy in many ways. For one thing, he hated summer holidays more than any other time of the year. For another, he really wanted to do his homework, but was forced to do it in secret in the dead of night. And he also happened to be a wizard. It was nearly midnight when he was lying on his stomach in bed, and the blankets were drawn right over his head like a tent, a flashlight in his hand, and a large leather-bound book, A History of Magic by Mathilda Bagshot. Propped open against his pillow, Harry moved the tip of the eagle feather quill down the page, frowning, looked for something that would help him write his essay, which, burning in the 14th century, was completely pointless. Discuss. The quill paused on top of the likely-looking paragraph. Harry pushed his round glasses up in the bridge of his nose and moved the flashlight closer to the book and read. Non-magic people, more commonly known as muggles, were particularly afraid of magic in the medieval times, but not very good at recognizing it. On the rare occasion that they did catch a real witch or wizard, burning had no effect whatsoever. So within a wizard or wizard would perform a basic flame freezing charm and then pretend to shriek with pain while enjoying a gentle tickling sensation. Indeed, Gwendolyn the Weird enjoyed being burned so much that she allowed herself to be caught no less than 47 times in various disguises. Harry put his quill between his teeth and reached underneath his pillow and out the ink bottle. On the roll of parchment, slowly and carefully, he unscrewed the ink bottle, dipped the quill into it, and began to write, pausing every now and then to listen, because if any of the Dursleys heard scratching of his quill on their way to the bathroom, he'd probably find himself locked in the cupboard underneath the stairs for the rest of the summer. The Dursley family of number 4 Privet Drive was the reason that Harry never enjoyed his summer holidays. Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia and their son Dudley were Harry's only living relatives, and they were muggles. And they were a very medieval attitude towards muggles, or towards magic. Harry's dead parents, who had been a witch and a wizard themselves, were never mentioned under the Dursleys' roof. For years, Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon had hoped that if they kept Harry downtrodden as possible, that he would be able to squash the magic out of him. To their fury, they had been unsuccessful. These days they lived in terror of anyone finding out that Harry had spent most of his last 2 years at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The most they could do, however, was to lock away Harry's spellbooks, his wand, his cauldron, his broomsticks at the start of the summer break, and forbid him to talk to the neighbors. Separation from his spellbooks had been a real problem for Harry because his teachers at Hogwarts had given him a lot of holiday work. One of the essays, particularly a nasty one about shrinking potions, was for Harry's least favorite teacher, Professor Snape, who would be delighted to have the excuse to give Harry detention for a month. Harry had therefore seized the chance of his first week of the holidays, while Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia and Dudley were gone into the front garden to admire Uncle Vernon's new company car in loud voices so that the rest of the street would notice it too. Harry crept downstairs, picked the lock of the cupboard up the stairs, grabbed some of his books. They had hidden them in his bedroom. As long as he didn't leave spots of ink on the sheets, the Dursleys need never know what he was studying at magic by night. Harry was particularly keen to avoid trouble with his aunt and uncle at the moment, as they were already in especially bad mood with him because they had received a telephone call from a fellow wizard one week into the school vacation. Ron Weasley, one of Harry's best friends at Hogwarts, came from a whole family of wizards. This meant that he knew a lot of things Harry didn't, and he'd never used a telephone before. Most unlikely, it had been Uncle Vernon who had answered the phone. Vernon Dursley speaking. Harry happened to be in the room at the time and froze when he heard Ron's voice. Oh, hello, hello. Can you hear me? I want to talk to Harry Potter. Ron was yelling so loudly that Uncle Vernon jumped and held the receiver a foot away from his ear, at the expression of whose mingled fury and alarm. "Who is this?" he roared into the direction of the mouthpiece. "Who are you?" "I'm Ron Weasley," Ron bellowed back, though he, Uncle Vernon, were speaking opposite ends of the football field. "I'm a friend of Harry's from school." Uncle Vernon's small eyes swiveled towards Harry, who was rooted to the spot. "There's no Harry Potter here," he roared, now holding the receiver at arm's length as though frightened it might explode. "I don't know what school you're talking about. Never contact me again. Don't you come near my family." And he threw the receiver back onto the telephone as if it was dropping a poisonous spider. The fight that had followed had been one of the worst ever. "How dare you give this phone number to people like you?" Uncle Vernon had roared, spraying Harry with spit. Ron obviously realized that he had gotten Harry into trouble because he hadn't called again. Harry's other best friend from Hogwarts, Hermione Granger, hadn't been in touch either. Harry suspected that Ron warned Hermione not to call, which was a pity because Hermione, the cleverest of all the wits of Harry's year, had Muggle parents and knew perfectly well how to use a telephone, and would probably have had enough sense not to say that she went to school to Hogwarts. So Harry had no word from the wizarding friends for 5 long weeks, and the summer was turning out to be almost as bad as the last one. There was just one very small improvement. After swearing that he would use her to send letters to any of his friends, Harry had been allowed to let his owl Hedwig out at night. Uncle Vernon had given in because of the racket Hedwig made if she was locked in her cage all the time. Harry finished writing about Gwendolen the Weird and paused to listen again. The silence in the house was broken only by the distant grunting snorts of the enormous cousin Dudley. Must be very late, Harry thought. His eyes were itching with tiredness. Perhaps he'd finish the essay tomorrow night. He replaced the top of the ink bottle, pulled the pillowcase from under the bed, put the flashlight and the history of magic, his essay quill and ink inside it, and got out of bed and hid the lot under the loose quill and that of ink inside it. Had got out of bed and hid the lot under the loose floorboard. There it is. That was under his bed. Then he stood up and stretched and checked the one time of the luminous alarm clock at the bedside table. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. Harry's stomach gave a funny jolt. He had been 13 years old without realizing for a whole hour. Yes, another unusual thing about Harry was how little he looked forward to his birthdays. He had never received a birthday card in his life. The Dursleys had completely ignored his last 2 birthdays, and he had no reason to suppose that they would remember this one. Harry walked across the dark room past Hedwig's large, empty cage to open the window. He leaned on the sill in the cool night, all pleasant on his face, the long time under the blankets. Hedwig had been absent for 2 nights now. Harry wasn't worried about her. She had been gone this long before, but he hoped she'd be back soon. She was the only living creature in the house who didn't flinch at the sight of him. Harry, though, was rather small, skinny for his age, and had grown a few inches over the last few years. His jet black hair, however, was always just had been, stubbornly untidy, whatever he did to it. The eyes behind his glasses were a bright green, and his forehead clearly visible through his hair, with a thin scar shaped like a bolt of lightning. Of all the unusual things about Harry, the scar was the most extraordinary of all. It was not that, as the Dursleys pretended for 10 years, a souvenir from a car crash that killed Harry's parents, because Lily and James Potter had not died in a car crash. They had been murdered by the feared dark wizard for hundreds of years, Lord Voldemort. Harry had escaped the same attack with nothing more than a scar on his forehead, where Voldemort's curse, instead of killing him, had rebound had a rebound on its originator. Barely alive, Voldemort had fled, but Harry had come face to face at Hogwarts, remembering their last meeting. As he stood in the dark window, Harry had to admit he was lucky even to have reached the 13th birthday. He scanned the starry sky for Hedwig, perhaps soaring back with him with a dead mouse dangling from her beak, with expecting praise. Gazing absent-minded over the rooftops a few seconds before Harry realized what he was seeing. Silhouetted against the golden moon was a growing, larger every moment was a large, strangely lopsided creature, and it was flapping to Harry's direction. He stood quite still, watching it sink lower and lower. For a split second, he hesitated, his hand on the window latch, wondering whether to slam it shut. But then the bizarre creature soared over to one of the street lamps at Privet Drive, and Harry, realizing what it was, leapt aside. Through the window soared the three owls. Two of them, holding the third, appeared unconscious and landed with a soft flump on Harry's bed. The middle owl was as large, gray, keeled right over and lay motionless. This was a large package they tied to his legs. Harry recognized the unconscious owl at once. His name was Errol, and he belonged to the Weasley family. Harry dashed to his bed, untied the cords around Errol's legs, and took off the parcel, and then he carried Errol to Hedwig's cage. Errol opened one bleary eye and gave a feeble hoot of thanks, and he began to gulp some water. Harry turned back at the remaining owls. One of them had a large snowy female, was his own Hedwig. She too was carrying a parcel that looked extremely pleased with herself. She gave Harry an affectionate nip with her beak as he removed the burden, and then flew across the room to join Errol. Harry didn't recognize the third owl, handsome tawny owl, but he knew at once where it had come from because, in addition to the third package, he was carrying a letter belonging to Hogwarts with the Hogwarts crest. When Harry relieved the owl of its burden, it ruffled its feathers importantly, stretched out its wings, and took off through the window into the night. Harry sat down on his bed and grabbed Errol's package, ripped open the brown paper, and discovered a present wrapped in gold with five first ever birthday card. Fingers trembling slightly, he opened the envelope. Two pieces of paper fell out. A letter from a newspaper clipping. The clipping had clearly come out of the wizarding newspaper, the Daily Prophet. Because the people in the black and white pictures were moving, Harry picked up the clipping, smoothed it out, and read, Ministry of Magic employee scoops grand prize. Arthur Weasley, head of the misuse of Muggles at Artifacts Office at the Ministry of Magic, has won an annual Daily Prophet grand prize of Galleonian draw. A delighted Mr. Weasley told the prophet, we will be spending the gold on summer holiday in Egypt, where our eldest son, Bill, works on the curse breaker at the Gringotts Wizard Bank. The Weasley family will be spending a month in Egypt, returning to the start of the new school year at Hogwarts, which 5 of the Weasley children are currently attending. Harry scanned through the moving photographs. Grin spread across his face, and all he saw were 9 of the Weasleys, waving furiously at him. Standing in front of the large pyramid, plump Mrs. Weasley, tall, balding Mr. Weasley, 6 sons and 1 daughter. Although the black and white picture didn't show it, the flaming red hair right in the middle of the picture was Rowan, tall, gangling, with his pet rat Scabbers on his shoulder and his arm around his little sister Ginny. Harry couldn't think of anyone who deserved such a large pile of gold more than the Weasleys, who were very nice, extremely poor. He picked up Ron's letter and unfolded it. Dear Harry, happy birthday! Look, I'm really sorry about the telephone call. I hope the Muggles didn't give you a hard time. I asked Dad, and he reckons I shouldn't have shouted. It's amazing here in Egypt. Bill's taken us all around the tombs, and you wouldn't believe the curses the old Egyptian wizards put on them. Mum wouldn't let Ginny come in the last one. There were all these mutant skeletons in there of muggles who had broken in and grown extra heads and stuff. I couldn't believe it when Don, or Dad, won the Daily Prophet. 700 galleons. Most of it's gone on this trip, but they're going to buy me a new wand for next year. Harry remembered only too well the occasion when Ron's old wand had snapped. It happened when the two of them had been flying to Hogwarts and crashed in a tree on the school grounds. We'll be back a week before school starts. We'll be going up to London to get my wand and our new books. Any chance of you meeting you there? Don't let the muggles get you down. Try to come to London. Ron. P.S. Percy's head boy. He got the letter last week. Harry glanced back at the photograph. Percy, who was his 7th and final year at Hogwarts, was looking particularly smug. He had pinned his head boy badge on the fez perched jauntily on top of his neat hair and horn-rimmed glasses flashing the Egyptian sun. Harry now turned his presents over and unwrapped it. Inside what looked like a miniature glass spinning cup top. There was another note from Ron beneath it. Harry, this is a pocket sneak scope. If there's someone untrustworthy around, it's supposed to light up and spin. Bill says it's rubbish. Sold for the wizard tourist, and it isn't reliable because it kept lighting up at dinner last night, but he didn't realize Fred and George had put beetles in his soup. Bye, Ron. Harry had the pocket sneak scope in the bedside table, where it stood quite still, balanced on its point, reflecting luminous hands of the clock. He looked at it happily for a few seconds, and then he picked up the parcel Hedwig brought. Inside this, too, was a wrapped present and a card and a letter from, this time, Hermione. Dear Harry, Ron wrote me and told me about the phone call that he had with your Uncle Vernon. I do hope you're all right. I am on holiday in France for the moment, and I didn't know what I was going to send this to you. What if they'd opened it in customs? But Hedwig turned up. I think she wanted to make sure you got something for your birthday for a change, so I bought you a present. By our order, there will be an advertisement in the Daily Prophet. I've been getting it delivered. It's good to keep up with what's been going on in the wizarding world. Did you see that picture of Ron and his family a week ago? I bet he's learning loads. Oh, I'm really jealous. The ancient Egyptian wizards are fascinating. There's some interesting local history of witchcraft here, too. I've written my whole history of magic essay, including some of the things I found out. I hope it's not too long. It's 2 rolls of parchment, more than Professor Binns asked for. Ron says he's going to London for the last week of the holidays. Can you make it? Will your aunt and uncle let you come? I really hope so. If not, I'll see you at Hogwarts Express September 1st. Love, Hermione. P.S. Ron says Percy's head boy. I bet Percy's really pleased Ron doesn't seem too happy about it. Harry laughed and put Hermione's letter aside and picked up the present. It was very heavy. Knowing Hermione, he's sure it would be a large book full of different difficult spells, but it wasn't. His heart gave a huge bound and tripped back in the paper when he saw a sleek black leather case and the silver words stamped across it reading, Broomstick Servicing Kit. Wow, Hermione, whispered. Harry whispered, unzipping the case to look inside. There was a large jar of Fleetwood high finish handle polish, a pair of gleaming silver tail twig clippers, a tiny brass compass to clip on the broom for long journeys, and a handbook of to-do-it-yourself broom care. Apart from his friends, the things that Harry missed most about Hogwarts was Quidditch. Oh, the most popular sport in the magical world. Highly dangerous, very exciting. And playing on his broomsticks, Harry happened to be very good at Quidditch. He was a very good Quidditch player, and he had been the youngest person in a century to be picked to be one of the Hogwarts house teams. One of Harry's most prized possessions was his Nimbus 2000 racing broom. Harry put the leather case aside, picked up the thin parcel. Third parcel. He recognized the untidy scrawl on brown paper at once. This was from Hagrid, the Hogwarts gamekeeper. He tore off the top layer of the paper and glimpsed something green and leathery, but before he could unwrap it properly, the parcel gave a strange quiver, and whatever was inside snapped loudly, as though it had jaws. Harry froze. He knew Hagrid would never send him anything dangerous on purpose, but then Hagrid didn't have a normal person's view of what was dangerous. Hagrid had been known to befriend giant spiders by vicious three-headed dogs from men in pubs and sneak illegal dragon eggs into his cabin. So Harry poked the parcel nervously. It snapped loudly again. Harry reached for the lamp on the bedside table, gripped it firmly from one hand, and rustled it over his head, ready to strike. Then he seized the rest of the wrapping paper on the other hand and pulled, and out fell a book. Harry had just time to register his handsome green cover and boldenize with the golden tire, Monster Book of Monsters, before it flipped onto its edge and scuttled sideways along the bed looking for some like a weird crab. Uh-oh, Harry muttered. The book toppled off the bed with a loud clunk, shuffled rapidly across the room. Harry followed it stealthily. The book was hiding in the dark place under his bed. Praying that the Dursleys were still asleep, Harry got down on his hands and knees and reached for it. Ouch! The book snapped shut on his hand and then flapped past him, scuttling on over its covers. Harry scrambled around and threw himself forward, managed to flatten it. Uncle Vernon gave a loud, sleepy grunt in the room next door. Hedwig and Errol watched him interestedly as Harry clamped the snuggling book tightly in his arms, hurried it to his chest of drawers, and pulled the belt out, which he buckled it tight around it, and the monster book shuddered angrily, but could no longer flap and snap. Then Harry threw it down on his bed and reached for Hagrid's card. Dear Harry, happy birthday. Think you might find this useful for next year's. With no more says no more here. Tell you where I see you. Hope you muggles are treating you right. All the best, Hagrid. It struck Harry as ominous that Hagrid thought biting book would come in useful, but he put Hagrid's card next to Ron's and Hermione's, grinning broadly than he'd ever had before. There's only one thing left from Hogwarts. Noticing that it was thicker than usual, Harry slid open the envelope, pulled out the page apartment within it, and read, Dear Mr. Potter, please note that the new school year will be on September 1st. The Hogwarts Express will be leaving King's Crossing platform around 9 3/4 at 11 o'clock. Third years are permitted to visit Hogsmeade on certain weekends. Please give the enclosed permission slip form to your parents or guardian to sign. A list of books for next year's is enclosed. Yours sincerely, Professor McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. Harry pulled the Hogsmeade permission slip over and looked at it, no longer grinning. It would be wonderful to visit Hogmeade on the weekend. He knew it was entirely a wizarding village, and he had never set foot there. But how on earth was he going to persuade Uncle Vernon or Aunt Petunia to sign the form? He looked over the alarm clock. It was now 2 o'clock in the morning. Deciding that he would worry about Hogsmeade from when he woke up, Harry got back to bed, reached up, crossed off another day on the chart that he made for himself, counting down the days left until he could return to Hogwarts. Then he took off his glasses, lay down, eyes open, facing the 3 birthday cards. Extremely unusual though he was, at this moment Harry Potter just felt like everyone else, glad for the first time in his life that it was his birthday.